But then he goes on to say something very interesting. In verses 34 through 36, he says, "Truly, truly, I say to you, everyone who commits sin is the slave of sin. And the slave does not remain in the house forever. The son does not remain forever. If therefore the Son shall make you free, you shall be free indeed." So the dynamic here is freedom to be what you were made to be as a child of God, and freedom not to fall into sin, and hence to become a slave of sin and contradict your nature. But you know, our good friend and colleague Os Guinness has a remarkable formula that he uses as he's discussing freedom. And I want to talk about this. There are three crucial aspects of freedom that he talks about. He says freedom, we need to see freedom as a gift, freedom as a relationship, and freedom as true. Gift, relationship, and true. I want to go through each of these because they're very, very important. So freedom is a gift. Let's start here. You know what I love about this? You know what I love about the magnificent sights we encounter in nature, mountains, trees in the fall, a sunset? Nobody gets to take credit for that. We can paint it, we can take pictures of it, we can write poems about it, we can write books about it, but we're acting as witnesses, creating tributes. There's no way to look at this as anything less than a gift. And freedom works the same way. We did not make ourselves free. We haven't made ourselves at all. It's freely given to us. Peter Kraft says, you want proof of original sin? Just ask yourself what you thought. What was your first thought when your alarm went off this morning? Was it, oh gosh, all the stuff I got to do today, all the lectures I got to go to? Or was it, Lord, you're here. Thank you. He says every day the Lord confronts us with two options. He says, in my right hand, here's my will. Here's my plan for your life. You know from experience when you follow this, when you act on this, in the long run, you get joy. But in my left hand, here's your will. You know from experience when you act on this alone and disregard me, in the long run, you get misery. And every day we say, well, gee, I don't know. Let me think about it. Maybe the left hand will work this time. You know how Einstein famously defined insanity? Doing the same thing over and over and over again, expecting different results. Freedom is a gift. We did not make ourselves free. Os Guinness puts it like this. He says, we did not choose to be free. From our parents to our genes to the color of our eyes and the day and place of our birth, we are dependent on the choices of others. And we grow up with a greater or lesser dependence on our relatives, our teachers, our neighborhoods, our countries, our history, and our friends. In short, we are not self-created, but creatures of our various cultures. And finally, we are human beings who are made in the image of God and who live truly and inescapably under God. Freedom, like your life, like the color of your hair, the color of your eyes, freedom is a gift. And we run into great danger when we take freedom for granted, when we forget that freedom is a gift.
The purpose of RZIM is to engage meaningfully with the questions and heartfelt issues of our culture. We do that in areas of business, academia, politics, the arts, and media. We live in an age of confusion, and people from every continent are beginning to wonder whether there are any answers to life's biggest questions. And this has provided a remarkable opportunity for the gospel of Jesus Christ. RZIM consists of over 50 speakers and adjuncts operating in over 20 countries, working at every level to reach those who shape the culture of a country and its future direction with the gospel. In addition to taking the gospel to various arenas of influence, we are also committed to providing a variety of training events in order to meet people where they are and to answer their questions directly. Whether it's engaging young adults and students through Reboot, Remind, and Big Deal questions, or the training we offer through the OCCA, RZIM Academy, and the New Zacharias Institute, We want to be able to take the questions that often serve as barriers to belief and instead use these as opportunities to share the gospel. By clearing those barriers, we can equip people to then engage with their friends, family, colleagues, and institutions. Our purpose is not only to increase people's knowledge, but to address the obstacles that stop people from seeing the credibility and beauty of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
So freedom is a gift, freedom is relationship, and freedom is true. Let's talk about relationship. You know, freedom does not exist in a vacuum. You don't just keep your freedom to yourself, and your freedom doesn't affect only you and you alone. It affects other people. And what you do with your freedom has profound implications for others around you. You should now hear an echo of that question I wanted to bug you with. Is there such a thing as a private act? You know, that's the subliminal message of this entire message. And those of you listening online, when you play the recording backwards, you'll hear somebody saying that over and over and over again. It's a trick I learned from Led Zeppelin. But your freedom affects more than just you. It affects others. You share it. It's like a meal around the table. I love the picture of a meal, and this image is taken from Babette's Feast, a wonderful film. But there's nothing that quite captures a shared experience as partaking of a meal together. We're all dependent on food, and we all need to eat for sustenance. But there's a profoundly relational component that enters into it as well, from the preparation to the conversation. But here's what I really want to talk about, and I want to dwell on this relationship aspect for a little bit, because I think this is an area that we're in danger of overlooking. Some of you will recognize my friend Clarence here. Anybody here seen the movie It's a Wonderful Life? Here's what I want to say. For the uninitiated, It's a Wonderful Life follows a gentleman named George Bailey. George Bailey is a remarkable human being. He lives a very selfless life. He lives for others, and he achieves monumental things for the betterment of those around him, his community, his town. But through circumstances that I won't go into here, he comes to a real point of despondency and despair. And he finds himself right on the brink. And he's ready to take his own life because he's really about to lose hope. And so an amateur angel is deployed to rescue George Bailey. And his name is Clarence. Clarence is missing something really important that most angels have. He hasn't got his wings yet. And he figures if he can go here to Earth and save George Bailey, he might just be able to earn those wings of his. But something really interesting happens between George Bailey and Clarence, the angel. At one point, George Bailey finally just says, "I wish I were never born." And a light bulb goes on for Clarence. And he says, "All right, you were never born." And suddenly, just like that, they are in a George Bailey-less world. And oh, how profoundly that world is altered. The people whose lives George has saved are now gone. And other people's lives, as a result, have spiraled out of control, and they're train wrecks. The town has gone to seed because George was never there to intercede on his behalf. The world is profoundly altered without him. Take George out of the equation, you have a different world. You have an impoverished world. I look out over this audience, and there are many of you here today. Some of you have saved other people's lives. Some of you have had your lives saved by others. I think it's an interesting philosophical exercise to entertain what Clarence has done. Just imagine you didn't exist. What would happen to the world if we subtracted you from the general population? Who would suffer? What would be lost? How profoundly the world would be altered. Because you know what? What you do has profound implications for others. You make a difference. You do not exist by accident. If you were taken from this world, we would suffer. Freedom is relationship. It's not something that happens in a vacuum. Freedom is gift, freedom is relationship, and freedom is true. Os Guinness says that freedom has to work within a framework of truth and virtue. What does that mean? Framework of truth and virtue. Does that mean that we're living in a world that's set up like a Sunday school class, where everything is very proper and there's a certain etiquette that governs things? Well, it means that the world is made in a certain way. Have you noticed that there are certain laws of nature? There are laws to the world around you, and then there are certain laws of human nature. And if we live in harmony with the laws of nature, we find that we flourish. And if we live in harmony with the laws of our nature, we flourish as well. But if we transgress those laws, if we try to act in a way that we are not designed, we find that freedom is diminished. If we train all of our efforts on the natural world, and we run roughshod over the natural world with no regard for the way the world actually functions, we end up plundering the world, and we end up diminishing freedom, and we end up shortening and lessening our possibilities. And likewise, when we try to transgress our own boundaries, we find that freedom is actually diminished. We human beings are odd creatures, aren't we? Walker Percy says that of all the animals on the planet, human beings are the only ones who continually want to violate and contradict their own nature. He talks about in a wolf pack, if all the other wolves stop howling and there's just the one wolf howling doesn't get stage fright. But we do. Why do I have stage fright right now? We're such odd creatures, and we're made in a very specific way. I often ask myself, why is there this peculiar resonance with zombies right now? Has anybody noticed that they've infiltrated just about every conceivable facet of our culture? From television shows to movies. Now not even Jane Austen is safe, by the way. Now you have Pride and Prejudice and zombies, Wuthering Heights and zombies. Why? I'll confess, I've always been a scary story fan, but I've never had any room in my heart for zombies. But I asked myself, what is this peculiar resonance? Why do these undead fiends keep showing up? There's something we find relatable here. And here's what I thought about. What is a zombie? A zombie is a slave to its body. A zombie is a slave to its own urges and appetites. In fact, you might say that a zombie is just a blind, walking appetite. A true picture of a mindless consumer. In our world of boredom, overstimulation, and excess, zombies just might be one of our most potent nightmares. They're here because we recognize them. Isn't it sad and isn't it ironic that often in the pursuit of unfettered freedom, when we want to do whatever we want to do, we often end up losing freedom in the process? What happens to a person who discards all limits? Who has sex without limits, takes drugs without limits, alcohol without limits? What began as a pursuit of freedom so often ends in bondage, so often ends in slavery and the lifeless steps of a zombie. But freedom has to exist within a framework of truth and virtue. John Dixon was talking about this morning, because the Lord created the world not out of any need, but as a gift from His own triune nature. And it's made in a very specific way. And if we live according to the way the world is made, we flourish. If we transgress it, we find ourselves embroiled in all sorts of slavery, all sorts of addictions. Os Guinness has a very telling quote about this. He says, "An endless proliferation of trivial, unworthy choices is not freedom, but slavery by another name." Freedom is not choice so much as right choice, good choice, and wise choice. When everything is permissible, no one is truly free. So it's ironic, but not accidental, that millions in the land of the free are in recovery groups from one addiction or another. Freedom as gift, freedom as relationship, and freedom as true. When these three are harmonized and kept in balance, we do well. I'll come back to them as we move on. So we've talked a little bit about freedom and the dynamic of freedom, and now we come finally to the million-dollar question. What is the American dream? Let's have a look at the American dream as it was classically articulated by James Truslow Adams in his book, The Epic of America. He says, the American dream is that dream of a land in which life should be better and richer and fuller for you, for me, no, for everyone, with opportunity for each according to ability or achievement. It's a difficult dream for the European upper classes to interpret adequately, and too many of us ourselves have grown weary and mistrustful of it. It's not a dream of motor cars and high wages merely, but a dream of a social order in which each man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable and be recognized by others for what they are, regardless of the fortuitous circumstances of birth or position. This is a remarkable statement. And now we come to, and you'll notice, John Dixon opened with this caveat, and I should have opened with this caveat as well. There's a minimal correspondence between what I'm saying up here and my notes as well. I tend to rove freely. I don't know, maybe I'm in heart more of an Australian, more of a convict mentality myself. But I want to explain this quick breakdown, because I've broken the American dream into three cutesy phases, but I think they'll help us to conceptualize what's happening. Because what you have here, you begin with what I'm calling country. And country involves a generous vision for everybody. This American dream is targeted at every one of us. It's a vision of the common good. It's a vision for everybody. But what's happening to the American dream, it's undergoing some changes, if you may have noticed. And even this statement right here doesn't really line up so well with the current climate of our culture. It's shrinking. It's getting smaller. That's the principal change that's happening to the American dream. So you begin with the country. The second phase is what I'm calling the neighborhood. Neighborhood's a very parochial, kind, and gentle word for it. You could also use words like culture wars, politics. But neighborhood phase happens when we start to retreat into our respective camps. There's shared values, but it gets smaller, and I'll go into each of these. And the final phase, I'm just calling the house. And this is when the American dream gets shrunk down to such a small size, it just focuses on you, yourself, and me, myself, and I. It's just an individual vision that includes no vision for the common good. So let's begin by looking at the initial aims of the American dream, when it was at first a generous vision. You know, there are three notable features about the American dream as it was articulated by James Truslow Adams, and I want to look at these. The first thing that it does is it's a positive depiction of freedom. This depiction of freedom actually accords quite well and lines up quite well with what we were talking about as the biblical understanding of freedom. It's not freedom from, it includes that, but it's not just freedom from, it's freedom to be. It's freedom to realize your talents in a social order that promotes those talents. In the words of James Truslow Adams, it's a dream of a social order in which man and each woman shall be able to attain to the fullest stature of which they are innately capable, so they can really flourish, come into your own. This assumes that your existence serves a purpose, and it also assumes that your existence enriches the culture in which you are. So the first notable feature of the American dream is that it's a positive depiction of freedom. This is not just freedom from, it's freedom for, freedom to be. The second notable feature is that it harmonizes the individual and society. The individual and society, these two have to balance one another out. They have to exert mutual force. There has to be a proper tension between the two of them, and this gets it right. That's what's so remarkable. We know that if you emphasize the individual at the expense of society, that can be quite perilous. It carries great dangers. If we consult the annals of history, we find that the ultimate expression of the individual being emphasized over society is fascism. And likewise, if we emphasize society over the individual, what happens? You end up with one of the extreme versions of socialism. But if you balance them, you have something quite unique. And notice that the relationship between the individual and society, according to James Trussell Adams, is symbiotic. Your individual self-realization enhances the social order, and the social order, in turn, enhances your individual self-realization. It's remarkable. But the third notable feature of the American dream is the way in which it measures success. In many ways, this is probably the most unusual feature of the American dream by today's standards. Because you notice, it's not based on social standing, it's not aristocratic, it's not based on the nobility of your birth, it's not based on your gender, at least ideally speaking, it is not based on your gender, and also, it's not based solely, success is not measured solely in terms of your professional achievements, monetary gains, money. No, this is almost a vision, I'm tempted to use the word calling, to be able to realize your calling, the reason you were made.
Welcome to the RZIM Academy Core Module. This is a training program for helping people to become more effective in pointing people to Jesus Christ. As you go through this course, you become better equipped to reach out to the people around you and have enjoyable, meaningful conversations with them about Jesus.
This is the task of Christian apologetics, to enable you to be more effective communicators of the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Register at rzimacademy.org.
On the next broadcast of The Apologist.